Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting in 1 minute, giving people time to sign on. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting real soon. We're just going to give another half a minute for people to sign on. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Bowen, and I'm the Director for Library Programming and Public Affairs. The library is delighted to bring people together for events like the one you're going to experience today. And I do want to mention, following today's lecture, there will be a Q&A session. Right now, I am so pleased to introduce today's speaker. Chris Doran was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. After receiving a bachelor's degree in biology and then a Master of Divinity from Pepperdine, he went to Berkeley to study the intersection of theology and science for his PhD. He returned to Pepperdine in 2007 as a faculty member in the Religion and Philosophy Division. After acknowledging that climate change is the most significant issue facing the future of human civilization, he created the Sustainability Minor in 2016. The Sustainability Minor is the largest multidisciplinary program in the history of Seaver College. His most recent book is Hope in the Age of Climate Change: Creation, Care, This Side of the Resurrection. I encourage you to check it out. The library has an ebook version which you can read. The book seeks to understand how the resurrection of Jesus should inspire us to be leaders rather than followers in solutions to climate change and other sustainability challenges. His current research articulates a Christian theological response to both human and non-human migration and the displacement due to climate crisis. Chris has spent considerable time in New Zealand, which led him to create the Sustainability Study Abroad program in Kaikoura. He is an avid runner, a certified scuba diver, and a friend, supporter, mentor, minister, and advocate for his LGBTQ+ students. Please join me in welcoming Chris Doran to the Zoom podium. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate you and the crew at the library inviting me to speak today. I'm not often a popular speaker because of what I study and how honest I am when I talk about the state of the planet these days. In fact, I can't count how many times Pepperdine people have said to me some version of this. Is it really that bad? Why are environmentalists always so apocalyptic? Or don't you think you're overblowing things a bit? Well, the answer is definitively no. Things are not good out there. In fact, things are very, very, very bad. I could talk about microplastics contaminating the world's oceans and now being discovered recently falling with rain from the sky, the 6th great extinction event of this planet happening right now, arable land being used unsustainably around the world and causing food insecurity. I could talk about global deforestation and its links to the pandemics that we see, like the one we're presently in. But I've decided to focus today on what many scholars, scientists, military analysts, economists, political activists, and many, many others believe to be the existential threat to human civilization as we have come to recognize it. Anthropogenic climate change. That is, the climate change caused by the human burning of fossil fuels and our carbon-intensive economy. Let me give 3 quick examples of how bad things truly are. First, it's not just that we're wasting the land we need to grow food, as topsoil erosion continues to be a massive and underreported global problem. We are throwing away food at a rate that should make us cringe shamefully. The US alone wastes 40% of all food that it grows and imports, and much of that waste, because it is not composted, turns into methane, which is a greenhouse gas much more potent than carbon dioxide. If global food waste was its own country, it would be the 3rd leading emitter of greenhouse gases behind only China and the United States. Second, as the planet continues to warm faster than many expected, ice at both Ice at both of Earth's poles is melting at astonishing rates, which is causing sea levels to rise around the world. This threatens many of the world's great cities that happen to lie on or very near the ocean. Moreover, accelerated warming means accelerated desertification, which means green spaces are shrinking as the world's deserts are quickly growing. These two phenomena alone will continue to radically alter hydrological cycles that human civilization has relied upon for the last 10,000 or so years. Third, sea level rise and desertification will likely cause 1.5 to 2 billion people to migrate by the end of the century. That includes both internal displacement, meaning those who might have to move involuntarily within their country, and external displacement, which means when people move involuntarily outside of the borders of their home nation. For today's discussion, though, I want to focus on the following single question. What role do American universities have in facing the existential threat of anthropogenic climate change? And for the sake of our limited time together today, let me suggest only three. One, universities need to be places that tell the truth about anthropogenic climate change. So what might that mean? It means that universities need to be heard saying these 5 words all of the time. Anthropogenic climate change is real. If a university can do that, then it also needs to be willing to say that anthropogenic climate change is an existential threat to our civilization, which, if nothing else, means that it will certainly impact the ability of universities to function as they have for the last few hundred years. It would be easy to say that in the face of anthropogenic climate change, universities should double or triple down on STEM programs and make sure they are oriented in the direction that will help us get carbon reducing technologies and industries in place as quickly as possible. That answer may in fact be correct, but it certainly is incomplete. We need every discipline in the academy to chip in and do so meaningfully and immediately. For example, psychology has been very helpful in identifying why humans as a species are so poor in responding to anthropogenic climate change. Hyperbolic discounting, which means we perceive the present to be more important than the future. The bystander effect, which means we believe someone else is more likely to deal with a crisis so we don't have to. The sunk cost fallacy, which means we are biased towards staying the course, even in the face of predictable negative outcomes. And our lack of concern for future generations are just 4 brain biases that give us clues into why we as a species are so bad at dealing with a problem that is this big. At the same time, we need theology, philosophy, ethics, etc., to help us with the contours of our responses to these significant challenges. For example, for example, should carbon neutral technologies only be available to the wealthy? Should climate migrants be welcomed hospitably into new home countries? 2, American universities need to take responsibility for their vast carbon footprints. Universities are basically small, medium, or large cities. Nearly everything we do has a noteworthy carbon footprint. For example, we travel from all over the world to come to a university, and then we leave and travel all over the place during our time studying. We use a lot of energy to power the lights in our classrooms, heat in our dorm rooms, or to keep the library at seemingly sub-zero temperatures. We eat a lot of food, especially a lot of factory farm meat and cheese, which contributes greatly to anthropogenic climate change. We have invested in fossil fuels for decades in order to build our all-important endowments. These things and many more must be acknowledged for the contributions to climate change that they are. No American university is blameless. 3, American universities need to be leaders in developing and nurturing the people who will go on to be community, national, regional, and international leaders to deal with climate mitigation and adaptation. If we are unwilling to devote our significant resources to developing and nurturing these sorts of leaders, then how will we continue to be relevant as the effects of anthropogenic climate change continue to manifest and exacerbate already terrible situations around the planet? So let me apply this 3-fold schema to my own alma mater, Pepperdine University. Number 1, are we telling the truth about anthropogenic climate change? While I don't think there are very many in our community who are being actively deceitful, it certainly does not seem to be a high priority, if a priority at all, for Pepperdine as an institution to say that anthropogenic climate change is real. For the sake of our students, our communities, around us are our donors and other stakeholders, it is vital that we say those words and in that order. Frankly, I hear far too many students, faculty, and power brokers on this campus still say all too regularly, is anthropogenic climate change real? Not anthropogenic climate change is real. Even after fires over the last few decades have surrounded and nearly engulfed our campus, fires which fit our best climate predictive models, Pepperdine still does not appear willing to admit that anthropogenic climate change is an existential threat. Put another way, what active institutional educational priority is climate education for us? Are students required to take classes about it? What active institutional operational priority is it for us? If there is, why don't all students and employees know about that priority? What active investment priority is it for us? Are we continuing to invest in fossil fuels and carbon-intensive industries? Or are we, like so many other institutions of higher learning, moving away from them altogether? It is fair for us to ask institutionally, not only how do our priorities reflect the acceptance of reality, but also what do our present priorities say about what we value? Moreover, as a Christian institution, we must ask, how does our daily behavior reflect our deep faith commitments? 2, are we taking responsibility for our significant carbon footprint? Again, the answer here is similar to the first. I don't think anyone is actively saying Pepperdine should use up every last bit of fossil fuel we can purchase. However, what institutional behavior do we demonstrate regularly and explicitly that says the size of our carbon footprint matters, or that climate mitigation is a pressing priority for us at Pepperdine? We continue to have both implicit and explicit contractual arrangements with carbon-intensive food providers like Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out Burger, and Sodexo. We send students all over the world to study, but do not require them to think about their carbon footprints. We have lights on in dormitories where students have not lived for a year, and AC units that keep buildings and classrooms chilled to such temperatures that some of us have floor heaters in our offices to combat the cold. We have shuttles that circle the campus with no one in them, and these are just some of the easy things to acknowledge and point to. 3, is Pepperdine a leader in developing and nurturing a generation of graduates who understand what anthropogenic climate change is and what their responsibility is to be a leader in their own home communities to deal with it? As an alumnus, a professor, and a donor, the answer is sadly no. To this point, no one I know of in the academic world or local Malibu government or environmental NGO space currently looks to Pepperdine as a thought leader on this topic. So let me now turn to the critical part of this lecture. Is Pepperdine equipped to meet the planet's biggest challenge? For the sake of argument, let's evaluate this from the perspective of our mission statement. Pepperdine is a Christian university committed to the highest standards of academic excellence and Christian values, where students are strengthened for lives of purpose, service, and leadership. It's easy to say that our mission statement is corny or vapid, but I think there is something really important and meaningful in these words. However, I believe these words will only continue to have real world meaning if, and only if, Pepperdine engages the planet's biggest challenge wholeheartedly and immediately, because our window of engaging this global conversation sincerely and credibly is closing rapidly. So let me go through all 3 of these. First, purpose. What better purpose is there than to prepare students to meet the defining challenge of our planet, and to do so from a uniquely Christian perspective? Like many Christian institutions, Pepperdine believes that it practices appropriate stewardship of the planet without providing any clear metrics for how it is doing so. In other words, our daily behavior does not seem publicly and transparently to match our faith commitment. As I argue in Hope in the Age of Climate Change, I know, a shameless plug, Christians need to stop using the vacuous term stewardship unless we plan to offer a definitive plan that measures daily exactly how we are treating climate change seriously. I believe wholeheartedly that our Christian faith prepares us for the necessary work ahead, because although the consequences of anthropogenic climate change include a very dark reality, Christians proclaim that we live on this side of the resurrection and not in the full darkness of the empty tomb. This means that if we accept God's challenge to act courageously in new ways, we can demonstrate hope to a groaning and hurting world. But let us not fool ourselves. The work of hope is not passive. It does not allow us to live comfortably in the status quo and wait for God to step in and do something. Instead, hopeful work is active, sacrificial, courageous, and ultimately loving. For example, hopeful action for a Christian university means that we must commit ourselves to working with and on behalf of those who have been impacted by anthropogenic climate change the most, but have contributed the least. Second, service. On our best days, service is what Pepperdine faculty, students, and staff do excellently. We serve each other in Malibu. We serve others in the greater LA area and across the US. We serve others internationally. Unfortunately, institutionally, we have yet to acknowledge publicly the simple but tragic fact. Anthropogenic climate change disproportionately impacts those who have contributed the least. In other words, and to use biblical language, the least of these, or the widows, orphans, and aliens across the planet, are the ones who are already being affected most by anthropogenic climate change and are the ones who will continue to be affected the most as the sea levels rise, the deserts expand, and the forests are cut down. If serving these communities doesn't fit the Pepperdine mission, then I don't know what does. And third, leadership. Could Pepperdine be recognized as an international leader on how Christians think about anthropogenic climate change? Yes, absolutely. Let me say that again. Yes, absolutely, we could be a leader. Are we currently viewed as a leader? Sadly, the answer is no. Don't get me wrong, I'm so proud of the first 24 alumni of the Seaver Sustainability Program and what they're already doing out in the world. I'm excited for the 10 who will graduate this spring and for the 60 who are currently in the program. But one academic program with 60 students and no funding is not nearly enough. Just today, Gonzaga University announced the launch of a new Climate, Society, and Environment Institute. Santa Clara University has announced that it is on track to be carbon neutral by 2029. Seattle University is a charter signatory of the American College and University President's climate commitment. Furman College is on track to be carbon neutral by 2026. And perhaps the gold standard, Loyola University of Chicago has opened a school of environmental sustainability. I won't go into all the cutting edge things that these schools are doing, like edible landscaping, green rooftops, banning plastic water bottle purchases, creating their own renewable energy, zero waste goals within this decade, and sourcing food directly from local farms, if not growing it themselves. That's not even to mention what our sister schools at Lipscomb and ACU are doing, which pains me as a wave to no end. I think it is fair to say, if Pepperdine aspires to be a leader and train the next generation of leaders, we need to answer the question, why are we not at least keeping up with these schools? I'm frequently asked, what sort of low-hanging fruit might Pepperdine pick to take anthropogenic climate change more seriously? I do not particularly like the framing of that question, since it assumes that this low-hanging fruit is all that is necessary to change the narrative and avoid more difficult conversations about structural change. But that point aside, the following 10 things are seriously low-hanging fruit, but that would have consequential impact and begin the process of making purpose, service, and leadership intersect meaningfully with anthropogenic climate change. Number one, an annual or biennial conference on the relationship between water scarcity, fires, and anthropogenic climate change. This is not just a local issue anymore. The entire western half of the US is now facing the effects of severe water scarcity and heightened fire risk due to an anthropogenic climate change. This is undeniably no longer a North American issue either. Just remember the Australian dark summer of fires in 2019 and 2020. Pepperdine could become the international destination for discussions about insurance issues, fire prevention, fire suppression, dealing with human and non-human migration patterns due to fire, economic consequences of poor fire season preparation, whether or not clean water is a human right, how food policy will be shaped in the foreseeable future based on a nation's access to water, or the economic ramifications of using reclaimed water in an urban environment. Number two, an annual or biennial conference on the relationship between anthropogenic climate change and sea level rise. It's not just that sea level rise is already affecting the house that Pepperdine owns on Broad Beach, because it is. is that sea level rise is already impacting every major city in the world that's located on or near the coastline of a continent, which, if you think about it, is many of the major historically significant cities all across the planet. Sea level rise will affect infrastructure like roads, transportation depots like the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, military bases like those in Virginia, but also the vast low-lying plains that are next to these major cities, which can affect people 10 plus miles inland. We know that whole low-lying island nations like the Maldives, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu will likely become virtually uninhabitable due to sea level rise in this century alone. People in Tuvalu and Vanuatu are already attempting to resettle in New Zealand and Fiji, respectively. Imagine all of the ethical and humanitarian and legal and political and economic aspects of this topic that Pepperdine could be leading a local and global discussion on. Number 3, an annual or biennial conference on the relationship between anthropogenic climate change and human migration, also known as climate migration. Who better than Pepperdine to talk about how climate change and climate migration needs to be considered from a human rights and international law perspective, or from the viewpoint of the psychological trauma of being a migrant moving to a new culture because you can no longer grow food in your ancestral land, or from the perspective of the vast national security concerns of military analysts who believe the threat multiplying effect of climate change will cause more significant and likely violent migrant and refugee crises than human civilization has ever seen before. Who better than Pepperdine to discuss the moral and theological dimensions of the loving our neighbor ethic as it applies to the climate migrant? Number 4, there may be no better way to show our commitment to learning from and supporting climate migrants around the planet than creating a scholarship program that seeks to support qualified students from places being impacted severely by anthropogenic climate change. Whether they be from low-lying island nations of the Pacific Ocean, or the expanding desert regions of Africa, or the severely impacted dry corridor region of our own continent. Such a scholarship program would be a noteworthy, tangible goal that demonstrates Pepperdine recognizes the realities of anthropogenic climate change and the responsibilities of our own vast carbon footprint. Number 5, a university commitment to an immediate, transparent, and publicly accessible carbon footprint audit. Heretofore, in my 13 plus years as a faculty member, I have yet to see Pepperdine publicly disclose the complete details of an audit that looks at the comprehensive details of our carbon footprint. For example, direct fossil fuel usage, electricity usage, food served in our various cafeterias, construction projects, athletic team travel, our international programs, etc. The educational opportunities for our students at our 5 schools to participate in this effort would be invaluable, and transparency with the results with our surrounding community stakeholders would continue the process of building bridges with folks who are reasonably skeptical about Pepperdine's public position, or lack thereof, on anthropogenic climate change. Number 6, a university commitment to public transparency about our investment priorities. How much of our endowment is invested in fossil fuel holdings and or other carbon intensive industries? How much of our endowment is invested in renewable energy or carbon neutral technologies that will make up the post-carbon economy to come? Why is that knowledge not publicly accessible? It saddens me that while a number of other Christian and secular universities have made both moral and economic decisions to divest of their endowments of the fossil fuel holdings, Pepperdine has yet to enter that conversation. Number 7, no commitment to take anthropogenic climate change seriously can come without a critical engagement with the food we serve on campus. It's pretty simple to me. If we want to be taken seriously as a leader, we need to thoroughly review the food that we actually serve on campus. Our meat and cheese-centered meal options that come from factory farm sources are the worst selection of food when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. As long as we have Sodexo as our food provider, our minimal response should be to require that Sodexo follow its own corporate commitment to the Global Meatless Monday program. Sodexo is actually one of the progenitors of this international program, but it has never been implemented, to my knowledge, on our campus. A former colleague and I tried for 6+ years to get the local Pepperdine Sodexo crew to participate in their own program, but to no avail. Number 8, a commitment to local food sourcing. Why are we sourcing our food from third-party vendors and entities so far away? There are numerous farms, both in Malibu and in the greater LA area, that could be important partners in teaching students about where their food comes from, why it is grown the way it is, whether it is making the soil more climate resilient or not. While we may not be able to source everything locally, we have neglected the opportunity to partner with local Malibu farms and others in our region. This not only would be educational for our students and deliver more nutritionally dense food to our campus, but increase Pepperdine's presence on an issue that many people on our campus and in our region believe is critical, but do not believe that Pepperdine takes seriously. Number 9. Before the pandemic, food waste was a significant and under-discussed topic on this campus. It seemed like outside of my classes, at least. As I mentioned earlier, food waste is a significant contributor of greenhouse gases and a critical moral problem considering the vast amount of food insecurity in the Los Angeles area alone. The conversation about food waste changed though here at Seaver when the Food Recovery Network chapter became operational in 2016. Since then, thousands of pounds of food have been recovered and donated to local churches and other organizations by students for distribution to those who are food insecure. The problem is that this student group still has to rely on someone in the Pepperdine universe to fill out just a simple form so that the students can come and do all the work to recover the food. Pepperdine should make it mandatory that all catered events that occur on campus coordinate with the Food Recovery Network. The slightly higher hanging, but likely more critical fruit to address is the vast amount of food waste created daily by our corporate relationships with both Sodexo and Starbucks. Finally, in September of 2019, the Malibu City Council officially declared Malibu to be in a state of climate emergency. While of course we are technically outside of the city limits of Malibu, I believe Pepperdine should immediately request a meeting with city officials and begin the critical work of partnering with our host city on all climate resiliency projects. It's not just a matter of being a good neighbor, which it is, but think about the educational opportunities and real-world experience our students could gain by working on urgent projects right down the hill with those in our community who daily work on these issues in critical ways. Too many in the Malibu community believe Pepperdine does not really play a big enough role in the community on issues related to climate change. What better way to change the narrative than to jump in and begin the work of thinking and serving together? Anthropogenic climate change forces Pepperdine, like every other university in the US, to ask a fundamental question. Do we want to continue to be taken seriously as an institution of higher learning, or will we become irrelevant as students and community stakeholders commit to places who accept the existential threat staring us in the face and engage it forcefully? I wholeheartedly believe that Pepperdine's mission gives us the opportunity to get in the game. On second thought, it's not that our mission gives us the opportunity, but more that it demands that we get in the game. Purpose, surface, and leadership can still be incredibly meaningful and relevant in the 21st century, both in the US and overseas, but only if we as Pepperdine begin taking anthropogenic climate change seriously starting today. Anything less dims our light on top of this Malibu hill. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your wisdom. This was so inspiring. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the audience. We've got a wonderful amount of people here. If you have any questions, we'd love to, I'll read them off to Chris. So if you could put them in the chat box and we'll start reading them. Oh, looks like we've got one in right now. You talked about institutional change, but what can I do as an individual to help?
Yeah, I think that is an important question. I get that a lot from students. You know, what can I do as an individual when the institution that I'm a part of or the system I'm a part of is not always moving forward as fast as I want. Well, I think one of the things that we can do is we can talk about this every day. There are far too few conversations going on around campus about climate change outside of the sustainability program. And the fact is, if we don't start talking about it every day, like we talk about other important issues that dominate our lives, how are we going to expect others in our community to think that this is important? So I think even just committing to talking to someone about this today or tomorrow or once a week changes what you and I think is important and communicates that to other people about what we think is important. Because the more we talk about important things, the more things get done.
Another attendee writes, do you think there is a positive foreseeable future for the Pepperdine sustainability program in terms of funding and more recognition?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The sustainability program at Seaver is what I'm assuming this person is asking about. Yeah, I mean, we went from 0 students in late 2015 and the beginning of 2016 to now 60 students. And, you know, at the end of this year, we'll have 35 graduates, and we've been cost neutral to the university. So I'm just so blessed to have students that are committed to this and have wanted to push me forward on issues and push the university forward on issues. So I think there's so much space for not just more dialogue, but space for donors and others in the community to understand what we're doing and to join us if we make this a more central part of our story.
Another attendee writes, how do you hope to see the sustainability department expand and grow to allow Pepperdine to become a leading university in sustainability and environmental studies?
Yeah, so, you know, all the universities I mentioned earlier that are doing really interesting things are all Christian schools. So it's fascinating to me that here we are, maybe the preeminent Protestant Christian school on the West Coast, and we are not known for this issue. So I think what we can do that's so different from other places is that we get people from all over the world wanting to come here because we're in LA and want to come here and understand different parts of just what we're doing. And we could sort of draw an international market in ways that lots of other schools cannot. And so I think that's important for us to be thinking about, which is, what does it mean to lead? Well, part of it means to lead is not just to take a position on something, but to include as many diverse thoughts as possible. So I think that's another piece of this, is to ask ourselves, you know, what kind of diversity of opinion do we want on this? And those who are in my program know that I love to think with as many diverse people as possible. And so I think that's something we're going to have to continue to ask, is what kind of views, what kind of options, what kind of challenges do people bring to the table, and do we take them all seriously or not?
We've got a couple of questions about renewable energy production. One specifically asks about using solar panels, and others more open-ended. You know, what are the possible renewable energy production capacity of the Malibu campus and other campuses?
Yeah, energy production here is a little bit different than it is places like Seattle or North Carolina or South Carolina or Chicago, some of the places I mentioned, because of our high wind issues. Solar panels are a little tricky as well in our little particular location because of fire issues. And some solar panels, for example, are designed and manufactured using cyanide. And obviously burning cyanide and turning that into cyanide gas would not be so pleasant to the human, non-human creatures to breathe that. But the good news is there are other manufacturers who make solar panels without that. And I would cross my fingers that the university would start becoming much more creative about engaging this, not just from an insurance issue, but an active engagement, and why we're not employing everything that we can on this campus. So whether it's putting solar panels on our rooftops, which may or may not be the easiest option, but why are we not applying pressure to Southern California Edison to purchase more green energy, since we're a large purchaser of energy from them? I think there's different pressure points that a medium-sized city like Pepperdine can put on a vendor that heretofore I'm not sure we actually leverage.
Another attendee writes, is the food recovery network dependent on students? Part 2 is, how could staff or faculty take part in the program?
Yeah, so the food recovery network, at least in my time at Pepperdine, may be the most important student group I've seen on campus. And that's not to defame the ones that I advise, because I don't advise the food recovery network, but to think that in just a couple of years, the food recovery network has literally saved thousands of pounds of food from going into landfills. It's just extraordinary. And I applaud all the students that I've known in that group for doing that. The problem is that Pepperdine institutionally has not made it a priority to partner with that group to make sure that all staff and faculty events and student events have maybe a form or an e-form at the end of the day that those students or staff or faculty members fill out to saying, please come recover the food. So it just seems like you could do that as a mandatory thing of every catered event when we come back to campus has a priority to engage with the food recovery network and deal with that. I'm sorry, Jeff, I forgot the second part of your question. What was the second part?
How could staff or faculty take part in the program?
Yeah, so I think, until that becomes mandatory, if it does or not, is for staff and faculty to just go online and find out about the food recovery network and find out who the student leaders are in that and contact them directly and say, I want to be helpful on this. I don't want to sort of be following on this. That would be another one.
And I too have to applaud the student effort. Being relatively new to Pepperdine and jumping in for library events and bringing catering, not long after I started, some students said, hey, we have this great program, and I learned about it from the efforts of the students, so I applaud them as well. Another question, students on campus seem to have such a strong care for climate action, but little action from administration takes place. What do you think is the best avenue for students to engage with administrators and to push for better action?
Well, I mean, the thing that I've been saying for 13 years now is that students don't realize how much sway they have with administration if only they will take the time to exercise their voices, because our school is so tuition dependent that if students said, I am not going to pay my tuition unless you do X, Y, and Z more seriously, things would get done around here a lot differently. It's just that simple. We don't draw on our endowment to support a lot of things because our endowment doesn't work quite that way. And so students have a huge sway in that. Now, the question is, how hard do students want to work, and how long do they want to work? Because a lot of these things don't just sort of change because you swipe the right direction. There's lots of long, hard, sustained work to get things across the finish line. And that doesn't mean that all students are afraid of that, but there's a number of students, and over my years, at least of being here, that are now always interested in that. So I think what I'm seeing, at least in my sustainability program, is that we have lots of students that are committed to that long, hard work. And that's really encouraging to see how many 18 to 22-year-olds really want to get involved in this in ways that previous generations may have not wanted to. So call, email, post, all of those things matter to a modern university. And so I'd say your voice matters more now than ever before.
Another attendee writes, and I'm jumping to this question because I think it's a good part B. Why do you think the university is hesitant to take such a, to make some action, to take the action against climate change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I have some guesses. My guesses are it's a couple-fold. One, universities are sometimes in these weird spots where they're trying to appease donors from different political persuasions altogether. And so it could be perceived as not advantageous to take positions that might, offend one group of donors or another group of donors. I think there's certainly a stereotype that Christians don't care about this issue. And so we wouldn't want to offend Christians that don't think this is a real thing. And then there's just some economic reasons. I mean, some of the economic reasons of us taking this seriously will actually save us money and, and not spend more money, but that is sort of a stereotype that is out there. But every university makes priorities, and I think the question that we're going to be judged by is when it's so clear what anthropogenic climate change is doing to us as a region, to us as a state, and us as a planet. And we look at the history books, and Pepperdine is not at the leading edge of helping with this problem. I think history is going to be very unkind to us, and our relevancy across the nation will change pretty quickly if we're not seen to take this seriously.
Another attendee writes, the Eden Project converted a residence hall into a green dorm to lower the carbon footprint. What's stopping the university from converting more dorms like that?
Well, that one's a real touchy one for me because I helped create that project, and the university did not listen to a lot of the advice that myself and another colleague gave, and now some of those things are coming true. So that dorm is actually going to be torn down in the near future due to the larger renovation and building project, which was one of the reasons I suggested it shouldn't have been made the target project. The other part of it that is just really depressing is that really only the first year of the Eden dorm was it actually active as the green spot on campus. Every year since then, there's been a failure of certain parts of our institution to make that a priority. And so I think the failure is not so much, do we want to do that with all the dorms? The question is like, why would we not want to do that with all the dorms? Why do we not have shower timers in all of the dorms? Why do we not have low flow things in all the places on campus? Why do we not have reclaimed water depots everywhere? I mean, there's just a whole list of things, and we've, I think, just been behind the curve in asking the question, why not? And instead we sort of sacrifice those questions for economic ones that sometimes don't have a lot of long-term planning, but have a lot of short-term issues instead.
Another attendee asks, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you motivated to continue fighting for the recognition of climate change when there's so much resistance?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a tough one. I think I'll say what I've told my students recently who've asked. If I had created a program that students didn't attend or want to join, then I think I would get a sort of signal that I was out in the wilderness by myself. But I do get a lot of energy from the fact that students take this really seriously. And 18 to 30-year-olds in particular see climate change as a really serious thing, even if their parents and grandparents think they're crazy. So I take a lot of part in that. And I'm take a lot of energy from working with nearly 60 students. I don't know all 60 of my sustainability students, but the almost 60 of them that I know really well, that I get a lot of energy from that, and know that I'm going in the right direction when those students are getting into graduate programs and getting jobs out in the field and doing really cool things in the sustainability sector. And those things you can't replace. Like that you can draw a lot of energy from seeing those kind of efforts.
We've had a couple of questions about international programs. One writes that they're already separating recycling and waste, asking if Malibu campus is also doing this. And then another just asked your perspective on the environmental impacts of IP and study abroad opportunities. Yeah,
so I mean, some of the nations that we have homes in are far ahead of us. I mean, Germany and Switzerland in particular, when it comes to trash management, is just far ahead of the US. And part of that may be because of their size, right? Like they just don't have the room to dig landfills all over the place and put stuff. Now, they're not perfect countries. I mean, they send a lot of their e-waste to Africa, and they do a lot of kind of interesting bait and switches with stuff there. But the US is just behind when it comes to recycling efforts compared to lots of other places in the EU. As for IP in general, I mean, I think the question that we should be asking is not, is IP meaningful? Because it is meaningful to how we can understand the planet. But I think the question we should be asking is why are students not studying about how climate change is impacting London, Lausanne, Buenos Aires, etc. And if they're not, why are they not? Because climate change is impacting every single place that Pepperdine has a physical presence or has a temporary presence with our summer programs. And to not ask those questions, I think, is to do a huge disservice to our students who need to know about how the world's biggest problem is impacting what they are or are not studying. And then, the other thing that would be really interesting to look at for our IP programs would be for students to actually think about that question directly. As far as I know, my 3 trips to New Zealand with students were the only 3 trips in the history of Pepperdine where I asked the simple question, is the climate change gases that are going to be created by this trip worth it? I mean, even just forcing them to ask that question and answer that question rather, in their interviews, I think is a substantial step forward to get us to start thinking about what is and what is not worth it.
Another attendee asks about clothing that's sold in the bookstore that's not sustainably made, and also mentions student activity, giving away T-shirts that are only used for the year and then tossed at the end. Just asking what if your students see, do your students see this as an issue? And I assume, do you see this as an issue?
Yeah, I mean, my students see it as an issue. I don't know if the student body as a whole sees it an issue. My students do, and if they don't, they're certainly forced to, because I ask them, like, how many T-shirts can you really wear at a time? Like, how many can you really own? And then we start getting into the fact that cotton around the planet is one of the most heavily sprayed by pesticides crop in the world. It's often picked by child labor. There's a whole bunch of problems with things like that. But I think this is one of the priority issues. We have a bookstore that is operated by a third-party vendor. It's not operated directly by Pepperdine, but we have to start asking more serious questions, like why would we think those things are okay for a Christian university? Just throwing things away all the time. The fact that, I just talked about this in my class a couple of days ago, the fact that we don't have a landfill in Malibu probably says a lot about our trash priorities, and that we can throw a lot of stuff away and it gets transported, 35 or so miles away from here into the Hispanic part of Simi Valley, and it just smells over there, but we don't have to deal with it here. And I think that's part of the circular economy issue that we need to start thinking about, which is like, how do we connect to our stuff from the beginning to the end? And if we're able to not connect our stuff at the beginning or the end, just in the middle, then we're not doing a good job of thinking about how those things might impact other people when we're done with them.
I know we're a little over time, but I know you said that we've got a few minutes that we can go on for. We've got a few more questions. I think at this point, I'm going to ask attendees to refrain from further questions so we can just finish up the ones here. We've had a couple of questions, I guess, asking for more information about the university's investments. Basically, how should the university divest from fossil fuel industry?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an easy answer to that, but what I do know, at least I think I know, is that we're not really engaging that question at all. Should we divest? Do we have a divestment plan, or are we just going to continue to invest in fossil fuels and have a huge falling off? I mean, what we're already seeing is the transition away from coal and natural gas is upon us, as electricity generated by solar panels and windmills, for example, is extremely cheap in most states, including California. And so why would we continue to put our endowment holdings in places like that? Now, maybe we're not, maybe we do have a transition plan, but if we do, it's not public. Someone who's been here for 13 years and asked a lot of questions, I certainly don't know about it. As someone who's a donor and has asked questions of high-ranking senior administrators, I certainly haven't got an answer that when I've asked these kind of questions. So I think schools that are often leading in this area are the ones that are most transparent and give information in publicly accessible ways so that they can be held accountable. And I think that's important to the modern student, and especially to donors, is like, how public and transparent are you with your data?
And as I've been going through these questions, I do want to share that a lot of the attendees have been sharing their appreciation for your wisdom, offering you lots of thanks. And so the final question, I think, is quite the compliment. It's, can staff audit your classes? We've got a new fan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have some official and unofficial policies, but put it this way, I've never turned anyone away that wants to figure out a way to sit in on a class. So yeah, if you're interested in doing that, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, and more words of gratitude are coming in the chat box. You know, I just want to thank everyone for coming. Really appreciate you taking the time to celebrate Earth Day with Pepperdine Libraries. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to share your research and your wisdom. I think it's been a truly inspirational way to celebrate Earth Day. I want to make a point that we have several other events coming up at the libraries, including a special collections virtual tour focusing on our collection of Malibu tiles. It'll be presented by Kelsey Knox, our university archivist, on Monday, April 26th at 3 p.m. And we also launch our Pepperdine Alumni Author Lecture Series with Dr. Catherine Meeks on Tuesday, April 27th at 2 p.m. You can RSVP for these and other events at library.pepperdine.edu/events. And Chris, do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we end the webinar?
Yeah, I just say that, listen, I say these things not because criticism, I say these things because criticism is important if we want a better place. And say that again, I'm an alum, I'm a current faculty member, and I'm a donor, and I want this place to be better. And I think most of the people that are on this call would want this place to be better. And so if we want this place to be better, we have to ask hard questions and seek good answers and be a part of a different future. And so I'm going to be a part of that as long as I'm here, and I would encourage anyone else on this to be a part of that as well.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective. I know I'll take some action after hearing all this. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us.